Okay, is that it now? No, no, yes, it is working now. Okay, so I can see the little, the audio apparently is working. Ichu Young, I don't know why. Okay, I guess that means something. Yeah, all right, all right. So, all right, so please have some chocolate. So I don't eat it myself. And let's go to the class, European U.S. Politics and Governance. So today is our longer class. And just to remind myself of the lesson plan. So we click on the lesson plan. And here we go to a provocative topic that you'll write a paragraph on and I will respond to. To South Koreans, make sure again that you can see this. So I'm going to share screen. And to South Koreans, the U.S. Congress is still too much shaped by the legacy of slavery to be truly democratic. And again, very timely issue, very timely topic in the United States is as we have the Black Lives Matter protest and the claims that basically that so much of the Republican Party base of Donald Trump is based upon implicit assumptions regarding the normality of white supremacy, which of course is a very controversial topic. And of course, you know, today people don't admit that they're racists. You know, I can't say, oh yeah, I'm a racist. I think white people are superior to black people, like the way Adolf Hitler talked. Right? Nobody says that, or very few people say that. But people make certain assumptions that what exists is normal and good. But if the United States was founded as a state based upon white supremacy as in opposition to other so-called races, whether it be the local indigenous Indian populations or Africans who are brought over, and you're going to exploit and dominate those people. People, as I said earlier, in terms of fundamental theoretical frameworks for explaining what goes on in human social reaction, human social interaction, is people want to feel good about what they do. I want to feel good about me. You want to feel good about you. And secondly, and this is also a fundamental principle of nationalism, people tend to self-identify within groups. D. Domenechez, let's pick on me. D. Domenechez, Ohio, Catholic, man, white, professor, American. These are all part of my in-groups. Some I feel very strongly about, some I don't care too much about. But what makes nationalism so powerful, it is that I feel very strongly about this vast in-group that I self-identify with. Because I implicitly know or feel that my own individual fate, my own individual well-being is connected intimately and directly with the well-being and fate of this big group. And there are limits to how big this group is. I mean, you have Icelandic nationalism, there's only 300,000 people there, versus Chinese nation statehood with 1.4 billion. The claim of people who teach critical race theory, of course, is that the United States was founded upon racism and exclusion of those people that are going to be exploited or whose resources you're going to take, whether it be the Indian population or the Africans who were, purchased from slavers in Africa. I mean, this wasn't like white people went over there and kidnapped. They purchased these enslaved people from other Africans. And that's a very sensitive topic. People don't want to talk about that, but it's true. There's still slavery in Africa today. Families still, because of poverty and suffering, will sell their children to work as enslaved labor, for example, on chocolate plantations. So that delicious chocolate was probably grown in West Africa. And so much of the chocolate in West Africa is grown on plantations in using child labor, children who were indentured, so to speak, as enforced labor there in Africa. And it's still there, all right? So, this is the foundation upon which the United States was founded, and you would think it's got to be very strong, right, in terms of coming up with very virile and powerful explanations as to why we are doing what we are doing. And because you can clearly know that Black people, they can talk, they can read if you teach them, but why are you not going to teach them? What's the justification for not allowing them to learn how to read? As was laws that were passed in the 1830s. And so, and this is also part of American popular culture. I mean, when I was my older generation of my parents' age, they would make comments about Black people that were totally typical, right? That you could talk about how Black people were really dark. He's a darky. I remember someone saying, I won't mention who, you know? So, and you can even see here, for example, this is from a film in the 1940s that I would like to find and order from Jim Crow, right? So hopefully this comes up here. I think you can see that. See the black face and white lipstick? Jazzbo Gin. So I think, Belgians, they've been dealing with this issue as well. Is there a tradition? I think there's a traditional figure in Christmas festival in Belgium called
Black Beat. Yeah, it's in the Netherlands as well.
Yeah. Somehow it's all tied up with in slavery and imperialism, right? How are you going to dominate and control Africa? Well, you got to feel like Black people are, they need to be civilized, and I'm going to civilize them. If I'm an Englishman, I'm an imperial Englishman or Frenchman or Belgian. And there's all sorts of interesting material like this. This is what we grew up with in the United States. People older than me, previous generations. Broadway musicals, they have a strong connection. This is called minstrels performances. People, often Black or white, putting special dark black makeup on their face. Again, I think it's worth highlighting this because this is the one I cannot seem to be able to figure out how to do myself, but it's not going to show. It's not going to show it. Okay, well, let me see if I can. If I do it the hard way. I mean, I just. What is it? Always so much excitement here with this technology. So, it's just taking too long, I think, but
wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. Wheel about and turn about and do just so. Every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow.
So that's from the 1940s. This film was produced. And now, of course, it became shameful, so you're not supposed to laugh at these things. So here you see.
By advertising on YouTube, I catch the eye of my ideal customers at the right time. I can connect with
So we're going to go there. Yeah, so yeah, this is the entrance for minstrel show. The minstrel show, also called minstrel, was an American form of racist entertainment developed in the early 19th century. So go on here.
Old Zip Coon, he's a learned scholar. Old Zip Coon, he's a learned scholar. Old Zip Coon, he's a learned scholar. Sings possum up a gum tree and Cooney in the holler. Possum up a gum tree, Cooney on a stump. Possum up a gum tree, Cooney on a stump. Possum up a gum tree, Cooney on a stump. Then over double trouble, Zip Coon will jump. Oh, zip-a-dudden-dudden-dudden, zip-a-dudden-day. Zip-a-dudden-dudden-dudden-dudden-dudden-day. Zip-a-dudden-dudden-dudden, zip-a-dudden-day. Zip-a-dudden-dudden-dudden, zip-a-dudden-day. Oh, it's old Sookie Blueskin, she is in love with me. It's old Sookie Blueskin, she is in love with me.
They can't speak proper
It's old
English.
Sookie Blueskin, she is in love with me. Went the other afternoon to take a dish of tea. What do you think now, Sookie had for supper? What do you think now, Sookie had for supper? What do you think now, Sookie had for supper? Why, chicken foot and possum hill without any butter. Oh, zip-a-dudden-dudden-dudden, zip-a-dudden-day. Zip-a-dudden-dudden-dudden-dudden-dudden-day. Zip-a-dudden-dudden-dudden, zip-a-dudden-day. Zip-a-dudden-dudden-dudden, zip-a-dudden-day. Did you ever see the wild goose sailing on the ocean? You ever see the wild goose sailing on the ocean? You ever see a wild goose sailing on the ocean? The wild goose motion is a very pretty notion. Every time the wild goose beckons to the swaller. Every time the wild goose beckons to the swaller. Every time the wild goose beckons to the swaller. You hear him google, 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 goller. Oh, zip-a-dudden-dudden-dudden, zip-a-dudden-day. Zip-a-dudden-dudden.
And this goes on and on and on.
Zip-a-dudden-dudden.
And of course, I'll let you watch it on your own. But of course, the title of it is Zip Coon. And coon was one of those terms that negative slurs, obviously, that, so here you can see a black man dressed up like he's wealthy and prosperous. Again, that's supposed to be funny, ridiculous. Coon was one of these negative terms for black people, almost as bad as the N-word. And I didn't know, I just assumed it's because the claim was that somehow they look somehow like raccoons. I don't think you have raccoons in Europe. We have them in the United States. It's kind of animal. It looks like a Korean raccoon dog. It's dark with white circles around the eyes. But if you go here to this website here, ethnic slurs. Let me see if I can call it up. And of course, I can't really do a search. Okay, ethnic slurs. So of course that term, that melody of Zip Coon, every American child knows that melody. They don't know the lyrics, but they know the melody because the other lyrics have been used with that melody. So it's typically associated with Turkey in a Straw is the name of that song. But list of ethnic slurs or ethnophallisms or ethnic epithets. And so of course, if you look up coon, it says here, a term popularized by coon songs played a minstrel show originally in the 1930s. There's some claim that this might have come from the Portuguese word for a jail. Anyway, so it's not really clear. It evolved into the term for a racial slur. Of course, you know, the most famous one is this one, right? And, but of course, not just blacks and others, but there's of course also other groups like my background, WAP is a derogatory term for an Italian American. For Orientals, there's lots of different ethnic slurs. This one, right? are used. And the reason I'm highlighting this, of course, is because it shows this process of stereotyping that I don't know if I really have it here to show right now because I have so many things that I wanted to highlight in this class, but the stereotyping of minorities and that typically including minorities that are seen as backward or primitive or childlike manifests itself in terms of this use of contemptuous terms for these minorities. And so I don't have my ethnic nationalism notes here, but those of you who know me, from my other classes know I'm really interested in nationalism and in the study of nationalism. So this class is about Congress, and the U.S. Constitution was written when, of course, almost 40% of the U.S. population was enslaved at the end of the 18th century. And so there's tremendous economic vested interests in slavery that, keep in mind, when the Civil War ended, all of those investments in human beings as property, vast investments, is erased. When Abraham Lincoln declares the end of slavery in those states that are rebelling against control by the federal government, and then slavery is abolished, vast amounts of wealth is just erased. And the southern part of the United States, like we covered in a previous class, is the poorest region of the United States still to this day, right? Even though it's got tremendous tourism potential because it's warm and nice in the wintertime, and lots of old people like to retire there because there's no snow or ice in the most southern part during the wintertime. And, but the southern part of the United States economy did not fully recover from the Civil War and the abolition of slavery until the 1920s. So until the 1920s, the southern part of the United States economy in terms of its income took that long, 60 years, to recover from the erasure of this vast amounts of wealth that had been invested in slavery as an institution. So the U.S. Constitution was written as a set of compromises to put aside the disputes, the intensifying conflicts between the slave-owning economy in the plantation agricultural society of the South, predominantly focusing on cotton and tobacco, and the industrializing North, which, aside from the moral and ethical arguments against slavery, wanted policies to be adopted that would support industrialization, including making it easier to import labor from abroad, including blocking British imports into America, because Britain was industrializing first, and to protect the American market for American industrialists, American business people who wanted protection from British imports because they were more efficient and more developed, whereas the southern states did not want obstructions to trade with Great Britain because they supplied the cotton to British textile industry was coming from the South. Of course, the British would find other sources of cotton, including in Egypt. Egypt became their main source of cotton in the British Empire after the Americans became separate from Great Britain. But I remember when I first got here to Korea, I went to Home Plus, the big store on Nyokok, and it used to be owned by Tesco. Tesco's a big British market, and I bought my household supplies I needed to get set up here, and I had to buy some bed sheets in that Tesco owned store, and they advertised the beautiful bed sheets I was buying is made of Egyptian cotton. Like, oh, Egyptian cotton, oh, that's really high value cotton, because British imperial empire is still a romanticized image in Britain today. And so the Congress was a product of these compromises, including the protection of slavery being a demand by the southern states, and that meant balancing against the rising power of the industrializing North with its more modern economy, with its commodification of labor, and the U.S. Constitution was written to overcome these suspicions that particularly the Southerners had, that the North was a threat to their so-called way of life. So if we go to the notes for this week, these are the notes from the book. So, let me move this out of the way here. So I think you can see that. Well, in case you can't, I'll make sure you can. So go back here to the notes. And you know, the authority, it states here that, of course, this conflicts over slavery began to intensify politically. And there were times when in the Congress, the United States, Congress people would fight each other, beat each other up on the floor of the U.S. Congress. Violence emerged on the floor of the U.S. Congress. The authority that the Congress was to have was originally intended to be much narrower, according to the intentions of the framers, than the powers of the Congress has today. So framers is the term that Sabato and O'Connor, the textbook authors, used. When I was growing up, framers sounds neutral and nice, but we used to talk about the founding fathers. Right? And again, very patriarchal, conservative man, white, rich man oriented, the founding fathers. Now we use the term framers, the framers of the Constitution. The framers originally intended the Congress to have the power to make laws and to raise revenues and spend them. Of course, when the Constitution was being written, the United States was overwhelmingly urban, rural, with farmers. Maybe no more than 10% of the population lived in a town or village, not to mention a city. And it was an agricultural economy. But since that time, changes in the demands made on government have allowed the executive and judicial branches to gain powers at the expense of the legislative branch. So the presidency, the executive branch, and the courts have become more powerful, along with the rise of the modern industrial economy, which requires monitoring, supervision, which requires that more quick responses to challenges and trends. Remember, when the Congress was first established with the U.S. Constitution, the fastest way of communicating was by a person on a horse, right? But by the time of the Civil War, you have telegraphs, you know. So along with the development of industrialization, that the executive branch acquires more and more resources, because it has to be responsible for more and more activities in actually implementing the laws passed by the U.S. Congress and making them real in conditions, in situations that the authors of those laws that were passed by the Congress didn't foresee. And this is a big issue today, right? That many classical liberal or libertarians in the United States are very suspicious of this vast executive branch administrative state that involves literally hundreds of thousands, even millions of people when you include the Defense Department, that these administrative bureaucrats, they take these laws that were passed 10, 20, 30, 50, 80 years ago, and they have to interpret these laws to a problem today in 2022 with pandemics and wars and cyber hacks, and they have a much more important role in shaping our lives than the authors of these laws that were written and passed by the Congress. And for some people who are strong focus on representative democracy, this is a threat, that this is dangerous. This is the deep state. The more conspiratorial supporters of Donald Trump talk about the deep state. All of these unknown, anonymous bureaucrats in their offices whom we can't identify are actually putting in the real substantive details for these laws to, as they see as appropriate and best, often under the pressure or guidance of powerful economic interests, because of course, who knows better how to implement federal trade law regarding the petrochemical industry or the digital social media industry? Who knows better the challenges and problems that they face than the representatives of the petrochemical fossil fuel industry or the representatives of Google and Facebook for the digital industry. And so these bureaucrats are going to listen to those lobbyists, those representatives of those special interest groups, and in creating the details or specifics of these vague general laws. And they are, by the way, these bureaucrats and the civil servants in the government may work there for 5, 10 years, make lots of friends in these lobby interest groups for the fossil fuel industry or Facebook. And guess what? They leave the government and they go get a job with Google or Facebook or Exxon or ExxonMobil and make 4 or 5 times their salary income that they made when they worked for the US government. And they know they are going to do that, right? When they go into government, that I'm going to get into government, I'm going to make lots of friends, lots of networks, and I'm going to leave and I'm going to make some big money. And this is true in Brussels and in Zurich and everywhere else where there's developed modern industrial democracies. So, but onward here, that's why the executive and judicial branch powers have grown, because that's where the real substantive details of laws are often decided. And if you challenge the executive branch's civil servants and bureaucrats, you're going to challenge their decisions in the courts. And then the courts will play a dominant role, and the judges and the legal experts in deciding what is the law in this specific case in 22 regarding pollution or digital media or fossil fuels. But still, the Congress, of course, has lots of power and authority because they are seen as the elected representatives of the American people. These bureaucrats and judges are not directly elected for the most part, except at the state level, right? In the state of Ohio or Virginia or California, they do elect their judges, but not the federal court judges. The power and authority of individual members of Congress have grown, the congressman must balance, or person, must balance several different roles of lawmaker, budgeter, and policymaker, with also the responsibilities as acting as a representative of his or her district, state, party, and sometimes race, ethnicity, or gender. It can lead to conflict. Having said that, keep this fundamental principle in mind for all elected officials, that you can make a safe assumption that any decision they make as a representative making laws will be in terms of how it will impact their ability to keep their job, to win election and get reelected. That will be the guide star. It's even more important than a guide star. It is the overwhelming determinant of the behavior of any member of, can't make a statement about everybody, but almost always, that is the overwhelming principle driving their behavior. Not because they're bad people. I mean, you can always come up with justifications that, well, who can agree on what is right and wrong? You might think that America's filled with guns, 350 million weapons floating through America. And that's horrible because that means thousands of people being killed every year by gun violence. That doesn't happen in Switzerland. That doesn't happen in Germany. That doesn't happen in Belgium. It happens in America. Oh, this is horrible. I might think, well, that's what makes America free. That's the price of freedom. Only a true free person is allowed to have weapons for self-defense. In aristocratic Europe, you were not allowed, if you were a mere peasant, to have a sword, to have a weapon, because you're a peasant. Only the aristocrats, the Junkers, they were allowed to have weapons. We are Americans. We are not peasants. We love freedom. So who's right? You might have an opinion who's right. I might have an opinion who's right. These politicians say the only way you can decide is by whether or not you approve of my job, how I am doing, by deciding how I am doing when you vote in the election about whether or not to elect me or re-elect me. So that is what drives Joe Biden, and that's what drives any member of Congress. And they put together a coalition of different interest groups, including economic interest groups, labor, capitalist, industry, but also racial groups, lobby groups, gender groups, human rights groups, and they rely upon that base constituency that got them elected to be the core to keep getting reelected. You know, nobody likes to lose their job. There's nothing as stressful as losing your job. It ranks up there with a death in the family or a divorce in terms of stress. And so these people desperately want to keep their jobs, and they are pretty good at knowing what they need to do to keep their jobs. Whether they're a congressman from Ohio or a senator from Idaho or a governor from Florida. And they know who their friends are and who are not their friends, and who they need to keep happy and who they can exclude in order to generate a winning electoral coalition. And they do a good job. I mean, 90 to 95% of congressmen who run for re-election get reelected. So they know, and that's every 2 years. So they know pretty much what they need to do. So Article 1 of the Constitution outlines the structure of the legislative branch of the US government. The Great Compromise at the Constitutional Convention led to the creation of the House of Representatives. There are 435 members in the lower house, and the Senate. That number 435 was set by law early in the 20th century. It's not stated in the US Constitution how many members of the House of Representatives there are. But I think it was 1911, early in the 20th century, they said, okay, 435, no more. And that means every 10 years, when there's a census taken of the American population, they have to reallocate those 435 seats depending upon which states grow faster in population than other states. So my state of Ohio, it always loses representatives. The numbers drop from 16 to 15 to 14 members of the House of Representatives from the state of Ohio because California is booming and Texas is booming and Florida is booming because it's nice, warm, and more supportive to businesses and more hostile to trade unionism. Florida, Texas, they do not make it as easy to form a union in a factory or store, a trade union for labor rights, as it is in Ohio, for example, or Pennsylvania. So that's one of the reasons why, even though Texas passes laws trying to prevent families from allowing their children to gain hormone therapy for gender affirming treatment if they are transgender, and that might be very upsetting to many people in America, or when Texas makes it basically impossible if you're a poor person to get an abortion in Texas. Still, Texas has low taxes. It's a so-called right-to-work state. In other words, you cannot force everybody who works in a factory to join the union the way you can force them if a majority vote to join a union in a factory in Ohio. Everybody working in a factory then has to join a union and pay monthly fees to the union, even if you were one of the minority that voted down to join the union. If it passes in that factory through a vote organized by the National Labor Relations Board that you want to form a union, everybody has to join the union. So it's called a union shop. Southern states do not have this. And that's one of the reasons why Tesla is moving to Texas from California, why lots of companies, including Hyundai and elsewhere, other companies that are foreign international companies, like to build their new factories in Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, southern states. They might not get paid very well in these southern jobs, but you know, if you go to Texas, that's where you go to find a job. You're not going to make a lot of money like you would in Ohio, but you'll find a job. And okay, so the Great Compromise of the Constitutional Convention, there's the House of Representatives and the Senate. That is the so-called upper house, copying the Parliament in Great Britain, with the House of Lords being the upper house and the lower house being the House of Commons. But of course, the US Senate has much more power in the United States system than the House of Lords has in the British system. So it's a bicameral, that's a Latin term. Bi means two, camera means room, a bicameral legislature, a two-house legislature. The population of each state determines the number of representatives it has in the House of Representatives. Each state is represented by 2 senators. So that means big California has almost 40 million people. How many senators does California have? What is your name? Micah, how many senators does California have? 2. And North Dakota has about 600,000 people. How many senators does North Dakota have? 2, yes. Is that fair? Is that democratic? And people argue about this. But of course, this is the product of the Great Compromise at the time of the writing of the Constitution. So Article 1 of the Constitution sets the requirements for membership in the Congress. House members must be at least 25 years of age. I mean, of course, people used to die a lot earlier back then. So, but 25 seems pretty young today. And they must have been US citizens for 7 years. And the senators must be at least 30. And they must have been US citizens for at least 9 years. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, he could probably run for Senate from California. You know, the great Terminator actor. But the Constitution also says that somebody can only become president if they are born in the United States. So that's different from being a senator or a congressman. That's a reflection of how in Europe at the time, it was quite common for princes to move around from different ruling families. The Americans wanted to avoid that. Yeah, George III was king of United Kingdom when American Independence War happened. George I was a prince from German state of Hanover, his grandfather. Representatives and senators must be legal residents of the states where they're representing. Only after the First World War, so 100 years ago, did most members of the House of Representatives come to view themselves as congressional careerists, seeing their careers as focused on Washington for the long term. Prior to the First World War, election to the House of Representatives was more likely to be considered a career stepping stone to something else, like becoming a governor. And it still is if you have national presidential aspirations. It's been many, many decades since a member of the House of Representatives became president. I think it must be 19th century. At the last time somebody was only a member of the House of Representatives then ran for and became president. Everybody else who wants to become president, they have to become a senator or a governor. But still, as I told you, 95% of these congressmen get reelected every year, every 2 years, sorry. And that means they run in 2 elections, the party primary election for Republican or Democratic nominee to be the representative in the Congress, and then the general election. So they're continually running for re-election. But you know, now you have people who serve in the House for decades, 30, 40 years. And that's good if you are wanting your congressional district to get benefits from Washington, including money in the form of infrastructure projects. So the long-term congressman for most of my life was Ralph Regula from my home state in Ohio. And he was there for 36 years before he retired, and he just died like 3 years ago. And he brought lots of money to my post-industrial Rust Belt, old industry area of Ohio, including money for Walsh University's nursing program. He gets credit for bringing money for developing the medical industry, because the car industry and the steel industry in my part of Ohio pretty much closed up because they couldn't compete with international car imports. So they have adapted by developing hospitals and medical care. Oh yes, in Massillon, Ohio, a little town close to where I'm from, there is the U.S. Museum for Presidential First first ladies. You know, the wife of the president is called the first lady. So Ralph Regula got money to create a museum in my hometown area for the first ladies of America. Which is good for tourism, right? Let's go see the First Ladies Museum and spend some money at McDonald's and the restaurants and at the hotels. Yay, tourism. So Washington was considered a backwater town till the 20th century. Washington, like St. Petersburg, I was talking in previous class, was a planned town in the modern era. The way St. Petersburg was planned by Peter the Great in Russia, Washington was planned after the American Revolution to be the new capital. And so it was, Brasilia in Brazil, a planned town, a capital town. And it was considered to be, it wasn't considered to be a nice place to be until particularly after the First World War. Then Washington really grew, and now it's considered to be a cosmopolitan, nice place to live. But for most of its history, it was this artificial town created because we don't want the North to be too powerful or the South to be too powerful. So we'll put it right in the middle between the North and the South, and we will take a little part of the states there. We make the District of Columbia. And the weather is, I don't know if you've ever been to Washington in the summertime, it's so hot and humid that before there was air conditioning, it was hell to be there. I mean, it was surrounded by swamps and marshlands, so lots of mosquitoes, and it was hot, and it was humid. But now it's where you go, one of the places you go in the United States if you're an ambitious person who wants a national level career. New York, Chicago, Washington, LA, and Washington. During the census, every 10 years, descensus means 10 in Latin, right? Centennial, 10-year counting of the population. There is apportionment, the process of allotting congressional seats to each state according to its portion of the population following the decennial census. So as I said, Ohio, my home state, is always losing a representative because it's cold and it's not beautiful. Well, it is beautiful, but not like you know, Florida or California. And so apportionment and redistricting. And this is a very political process. This is where so-called gerrymandering occurs. Gerrymandering, I think I have a reference here, is using the reapportionment and redistricting process to draw congressional district boundaries in a way that will help me keep my job as a congressman by making sure that the people who are in the new congressional boundaries are going to be people that like me, and people that don't like me are kept out. Right? So, and this process is a slang term called gerrymandering. So if you go to Wikipedia, which, you know, is a nice place to start if you want some basic information about these things, you know, I use, you know, Wikipedia for basic information, gerrymandering. And so you can see how you draw the boundaries in a way to help make sure that you get elected or keep your opponents out. And it's often involved racism. And of course, the term gerrymandering comes from a newspaper editorial highlighting how the boundaries of this political government district were drawn in this funky way here to help a friend of the governor of Massachusetts, a man named Eldridge Gerry, who was one of the writers of the U.S. Constitution. He drew these boundaries in a way, so it looks like a salamander. So somebody called this a gerrymander. And so that's where the term gerrymandering comes from. And so the idea is to draw the boundaries in a way to help you get reelected. So if, you know, 60% of the state, this is a state, Ohio or Alabama, are Republican and 40% are Democrats, and you have 5 districts, you can draw them this way, and so everybody is 40% Democrat, 60% Republican, or you can draw it this way, whereby the 3 of the 5 districts are overwhelmingly Democrat, and 2 of them are overwhelmingly blue. So the Democrats would have an advantage, even though they're only 40% of the population in terms of the congressional representatives that they send to the Congress. And this, when this intersects with race, this is where it becomes controversial, because this was done in the American South. Draw the boundaries of these congressional districts in such a way that black people never send a congressman to Congress, never send a person to Congress, even though they're a third of the population in Alabama and Georgia and South Carolina. Only after the 1960s did they end up sending any black people to the US Congress to represent their states. So, you know, if I go here and I show you Ohio congressional districts, and this is a controversial issue today. So we go here, and this is my home state. And so my home is here, right about here, or that's where I registered to vote. So you can see how the boundaries have been drawn, some funky boundaries. Look at this. I mean, this is urban area here, urban area here. This is all farmland. And this is overwhelmingly Republican. So Bob Gibbs is the congressional representative for the 7th district. He doesn't ever have to worry about getting reelected. He's Republican because a Democrat will not win here unless Bob Gibbs is criminally insane and does something criminally insane. The Democrats don't even bother often to have a candidate run against him because it's hopeless. They think it's hopeless. But the US Supreme Court said, hey, you states, after the civil rights legislation was passed in the 1960s, you've got to, you know, draw these boundaries in a way that, you know, doesn't appear to be so blatantly racist. So the Republicans said, okay, if that's what you insist on, we'll make an overwhelmingly black district here. And this is the 11th district, and this is overwhelmingly Democratic because it's overwhelmingly African American. And so they said, okay, are you happy now, Supreme Court? We've guaranteed a black person will be sent to the US Congress, or they don't say that. They said, well, this is overwhelmingly Democratic, so we know there will always be a Democrat elected here. And that was Marcia Fudge. Marcia Fudge was a long-term black woman representative from Ohio, and she was named by Biden as the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So she's no longer the congressman there. And so this is a very political process. This is decided by the states. So the state politicians, not the national politicians in Ohio, decide how they're going to draw these districts. And as I told you, I think 99% of the people who live in my hometown here, they can't even tell you who the state representatives are. This is for the US House of Representatives from Ohio. But like, who are these Ohio politicians that are drawing these boundaries? They might tell you the governor, Mike DeWine, is a Republican governor of Ohio, but could they name the member of the US Ohio Assembly, not the US, the Ohio Assembly, or their Ohio senator? I would bet you 99% couldn't tell you. I mean, I can't even remember right now. I think it's Oslager. I can't even remember the name. I vote Democrat. Doesn't really matter who their names are. So states have a lot of power, right, in US. So here you can see the representatives. Look at this funky district. Yeah, Republican, Democrat. Oh, this guy, Jim Jordan, he's a big Trump ally. He's in trouble now because he had some role in the January 6th uprising in the United States. He was Mr. Donald Trump, and he has this district. And here's my congressman. He's helped me out. You know, I had some problems, and I sent his office a letter, and they helped me. So that's a big part of what congressmen do. They help people get their benefits from the U.S. government that they think they're owed. I had a problem. The Internal Revenue Service in the United States said I owed the U.S. government like $4,000. I said, this is wrong. And I had to fight. I spent all this time. I wasted all sorts of time on this. And then I sent him a message, a letter, and they fixed it. That was like 3 years ago. Mary Captor, this is all Democrats, this is all, you know, industrialized area here. This was, and then this is the person who replaced Marcia Fudge. She's now representative of this district here. And he got in trouble because he voted to impeach Donald Trump, because the House of Representatives votes on whether or not to put a president on trial. That's what an impeachment is, to put them on trial. He was one of 10 congressmen, Republican congressmen, to vote to impeach him for the January 6th uprising. And Donald Trump mobilized his supporters against him, and he is not running for re-election because he's afraid for the safety of his children and his wife, because he's getting these death threats. So he's not running for re-election. He was a big Ohio State football star. He was a big wide receiver for the Ohio State Buckeye football team when they won the national championship. And he ran for Congress. He's a Cuban American. And then after he voted to impeach Donald Trump, one of 10, only 10 Republicans in the House of Representatives, he has been receiving death threats. And he's not fearful for himself, but I'm sure he's worried about his wife and children. So he's not running for re-election. There will be primary elections to determine who will be the Republican and Democrat nominees for each of these districts in a month from now. Back to the notes, make sure you can see that. Oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry, that's the other class. Oops. So make sure you can see that. Here's here. No, that's not it. Okay. So redistricting, in 1929, the House fixed its size at 435 members. The House of Representatives was intended to be more responsive to immediate public opinion pressures, so the term of office is 2 years. The Senate is for 6 years. Now, originally, when the Constitution was written, the senators were not elected. They were appointed by the state governments of Ohio, California, Texas, New York. The state governments, through their internal process, however they decided, would choose the senators. But that was seen as facilitating or allowing corruption. So early in the 20th century, the 16th or 17th Amendment was passed to the US Congress, requiring voters to elect their senators directly. You know, Mike is from Germany, that the German parliament has the Bundestag and the Bundesrat. The Bundesrat members are representatives from the Länder. The Länder are not, those representatives are not directly elected. They are appointed by the state governments, the Land government in each German state. But they do make some accommodation for different population size. So Bavaria has more members in the Bundesrat than the smaller states. It's still not proportional, but it's not like the US Senate where everybody gets 2, regardless of how many people live in each state. And again, that was partly this need to assuage the suspicions of the South that the North was going to try to make them change their system of slavery. Originally, each state legislature was to choose 2 senators to send to Washington. The framers intended the senators to represent their state's respective interests. Yes, the 17th Amendment in 1913 ended this control by state legislatures because it required direct election of senators. And so 1/3 of the 100 senators are up for re-election every 2 years. And the Constitution specifically gives Congress its most important powers, the authority to make laws and to raise and spend revenues. A bill is a proposed law. Most bills fail. There are thousands and thousands of bills proposed every year, and overwhelming majority just don't go anywhere. They die. And any congressperson can propose a bill, but the biggest source of bills is the presidency, the executive branch, because the executive branch is responsible for executing the laws. Executive, execute, get that? Executive, execute the laws. So who knows better the successes and problems, the weaknesses and strengths of the laws of the United States than the people responsible for executing them? Because they are there in the United States, throughout the United States, implementing the law. And so they provide feedback back to the presidential headquarters in the executive branch headquarters in Washington, and then Washington executive branch headquarters makes a proposal for amending the laws, also determining how much money to spend to implement the policy with its own estimation of how much resources are necessary. So it has turned out, unintended, 240 years ago, that the executive branch is overwhelmingly the single most important actor in, not the only, it's the most important actor in making legislation. Because the Congress doesn't have to approve it, but the executive branch, through its budget proposals, begins the process of debate. It's where you start to argue. If you're a congressman or woman, or the president's representatives, or an interest group that pays attention to politics, you start arguing over what the president's Office of Management and Budget has proposed for the budget, for the government budget, for the national budget, for the federal government budget. And then you change it, you modify it, but they give you basically the starting figure that everybody argues about and tries to change and influence. The necessary and proper clause, which is located at the end of Article 1, Section 8, gives Congress the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. The foregoing powers are enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8. So thus, the Congress has been able to expand its authority, often at the expense of the states, into policy areas that the framers did not originally intend when they are writing an agrarian America at the end of the 18th century, population 4 million, with 1/3 of that population being enslaved people. Congress and the president, the Constitution envisioned that Congress and the president would have discrete powers, that there would be president's powers, executive branch powers, and the legislature's powers, and that they couldn't directly control each other the way the British Prime Minister controls the House of Commons. The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister in Britain because the Prime Minister is able to tell a majority of people in the House of Commons how to vote. If you don't listen to the Prime Minister, your career is probably over in politics. But that's the people that wrote the US Constitution did not want that system. They wanted the Congress to be autonomous from the president. It could still be influenced, pressured by public opinion appeals, but not controlled. So there was discrete powers. One branch would be able to hold the other in check. Since the 1930s, the president has had the upper hand. Not coincidentally, but not coincidentally because of war, including World War II, and then the Cold War. Like Anes is in the European politics class, so we're always talking about the Cold War, right? And the American belief that the Soviet Union is a Russian version of Nazi Germany, and they have nuclear weapons. So how is the Russian version of Nazi Germany supposedly going to spread its influence and domination control? Through its spies and covert operations. So we have to give the US president the power, all the power and resources he needs to fight this massive shadow war being fought in every country of the world: Belgium, Germany, Congo, Vietnam, Korea, Chile, to act quickly and fast wherever the communists and their agents are trying to carry out their plans directed ultimately from Moscow to take over the other countries, not the way Germany did by invading them with the Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe. No, no, no. The communists will work through their spies, their agents. And so we have to give all this power to the US president so he can be vigilant with massive intelligence operations like the CIA and the National security agency and CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, and a vast military infrastructure so that he can act quickly wherever it's necessary, wherever the communists are attempting their evil plans. And it supposedly worked. America saved the world from the Russian version of Nazi Germany, supposedly. And the president, and that meant Donald Trump, got all of this power in their hands. And like most human beings, they don't want to give up the power that they have. And they will see a world in a way that makes them feel good and argue to you and to you how they should keep that power. And how they are a force for peace in the world, because after all, we saved the world from the Russian version of Nazi Germany. But those people who criticized this presidential power in the midst of the catastrophe of the Vietnam War, they began to talk about the imperial presidency. The president has become this all-powerful actor who can order military operations without getting approval from the US Congress, and order soldiers to go into battle and fight and die and kill without getting the US Congress to declare war first. And this is not good, supposedly. And that was a response to the Vietnam War catastrophe. But Congress still has ultimate legislative authority to question executive actions, and Congress can impeach and even remove him from office, but they've never done it. I mean, well, they didn't officially do it. Richard Nixon did resign in 1974 because he knew he was going to be impeached, and if the impeachment did happen, a trial, he was going to be found guilty, so he quit before they could impeach him and remove him. So, but Bill Clinton was impeached, and it requires 2/3 of the senators to vote to convict. So Bill Clinton was impeached because he lied under oath when he was being investigated about, and originally the investigation was over a real estate deal when he was a governor in Arkansas, state of Arkansas, called Whitewater Residential Real Estate Development, to make some money. And then it expanded because they found out he had an affair with a young intern in the White House, Monica Lewinsky. And when they were investigating this, they asked him under oath, you can't lie to an investigator, to an FBI police investigator when he questions you. He lied about having sex. And because he was the president responsible for executing the laws of the United States, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives decided that we should impeach him because, my God, the top enforcer of the law has lied under oath about having sex with this intern. You can't lie under oath. So they put him on trial, and we watched it on CNN when they had this trial in the 1990s. And of course, 67 senators did not vote to convict, only 50. It was 50-50. So he was found not guilty. And it all was entertaining in a way, but then it became a precedent for impeaching Trump. The first time over Ukraine, when he tried to pressure Zelensky in Ukraine to help him, to help the Trump campaign by lying about Joseph Biden being involved in helping his son make money with corrupt Ukrainian business people. And so that experience with Bill Clinton was still relatively fresh, with lots of congressmen who were in the Congress when Bill Clinton was impeached in 1998? He was impeached in 1990s. And so it wasn't so unfamiliar, right? We haven't had an impeachment trial before Bill Clinton since the 1860s, when Andrew Johnson was impeached and found not guilty by one vote for challenging the power of Congress after the Civil War to do what the Congress wanted to do to reconstruct the United States, basically. Andrew Johnson was a pro-Southern vice president under Lincoln. That Lincoln made his vice president to win the election, and then Lincoln got killed, was murdered, and then Andrew Johnson became president, and the Congress did impeach him, but was one vote short of removing him from office. So that was a long time ago. So, but in the 1990s, we did it with Bill Clinton, and that helped make this more normal. And then Donald Trump would be impeached again 14 months ago, the second time, for supposedly instigating the January 6th uprising against the Congress in trying to stop Joe Biden from becoming president. So impeachment now is familiar, unlike what it had been in the 1990s. And so is that going to shape Joe Biden's behavior if the Republicans in November of this year take control of the House and the Senate by a majority, that Joe Biden has to be worried they might vote to impeach me? And maybe they won't find him guilty because it's awfully difficult to find 67 votes of the Senate to vote to convict. But is that made impeachment more? Yeah, probably has, because we've all seen it happen 3 times since the late 1990s. 3 times we've had impeachments. I mean, I remember when I was a small child, when they were talking about, will Richard Nixon be impeached for Watergate? Impeach? How do you do that? What is that? How do you 1860s, Andrew Johnson. Who is Andrew Johnson? Okay, so this is a list of the powers of the Congress: to lay and collect taxes and duties, borrow money, etc. This is all written at the end of the 18th century, right? Provide for a militia. That was basically the Americans. Again, this is an interesting point, because liberals like John Locke, going back to John Locke, they were always suspect about professional armies, because professional armies cause trouble. They typically are soldiers that can be hired and they can be used by politicians to achieve their objectives. So this goes back to, as I said, the first liberal thinkers of, like John Locke. So the Americans didn't want to have a professional army, a big professional army, and they would only build a big professional army during a wartime, the Civil War, World War I, and then after those wars are over, the army is pretty much reduced to a small professional group that's there just in case you need to build a bigger army when a war happens. And that changes after World War II. The Americans win World War II. They start cutting back the military drastically, letting the men come back and get married and build houses and get married and make babies and go to college. And then the Cold War starts. North Korea invades South Korea, and Harry Truman builds a huge military to deal with the Korean War. And the consensus view in the United States that the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin was a Russian version of Nazi Germany, and Joseph Stalin is a Russian version of Adolf Hitler, and he's got nuclear weapons. And so despite this traditional suspicion of large professional militaries, the United States built one after World War II, and it's never been fully at peace with that, particularly after the catastrophe of the Vietnam War. But at the same time, the US economy has become more and more dependent or sensitive to military budget expenditures to build military supplies that employ thousands, if not millions, well, probably millions of people. When you think of all of the companies in the United States, they somehow have some Defense Department contract to supply the US Defense Department, the military, with guns, tanks, ships, software, airplanes, whatever. I mean, at least 10% of the US manufacturing capacity is connected to defense supply, military supply. And if you're a congressperson, you want to get reelected. And how do you get reelected? You bring money to your district. And that certainly means making sure that if there is a military base in your district that employs hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, that base is not closed, even if that base is not necessary, or arguably not necessary, because that base supplies lots of job opportunities for people in your district. Lots of businesses supply that military base with everything from food to software. And so we see, even under Trump, despite Donald Trump's skepticism about US involvement, he increased the size of the military when Donald Trump was president. And Joe Biden, he didn't want to increase the size of the military. This is before the war in Ukraine started. The US Congress added more money to the budget proposal that Joe Biden suggested from his office for the military, added $28 billion to the military budget before the Ukraine war. Joe Biden made a proposal, wanted to keep the military budget the same. Remember, the US military budget is 40% of the total world military expenditures. 40% is just the United States. The US military budget is the same as the 10 next countries combined, or it was before the Ukraine war. So when you add Russia, China, Germany, France, the US budget is the equivalent of the next 10 countries combined. Now, keep in mind, the US military budget is also paying salaries and pensions. And American salaries and American labor is much more expensive than it is in Russia, much more expensive than it is in China, right? So that's an important caveat. But it just goes to show, despite this American traditional culture, political culture of suspicion towards the big, vast, powerful central state, when it comes to the military, Americans are also very much aware of the usefulness of government spending that can be justified to defend the nation against the communists or the terrorists or China or Russia. Got to spend more money for the military. Yeah. Okay. So ultimately, each House of Congress must approve the same piece of legislation using the exact same wording for a bill to be passed. So the Constitution declares that the House of Representatives should be the point of origin in the process for all revenue-raising bills, but over the generations that mandate has become irrelevant, with revenue bills commonly being considered simultaneously in both houses. But still, they've got to go through the ritual of having the House of Representatives be the first House of Congress to be the place where a budget bill that requires spending money is introduced, because the House has got to be the first House to consider laws that require spending money, or policies that require spending money. The House has the power of impeachment, the power delegated to the House of Representatives in the Constitution to charge the president, vice president, or other civil officers, including judges or department secretaries, including federal judges, with treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. What does that mean? That's up to the Congress to decide what it means. This is very, very general and vague. What's a high crime and misdemeanor? Like a misdemeanor, like buying some marijuana, that's a misdemeanor. So you can, I guess, according to the impeachment clause, you can impeach a president for buying a bag of marijuana because that's a misdemeanor. This is the first step in the constitutional process of removing government officials from office. And like I said, when this PowerPoint slide set was developed in 2006, we just went through 10 years earlier, several years earlier, the Clinton impeachment. So the 8 stages of the impeachment process, there's the resolution. A resolution called an inquiry of impeachment is sent to the House Judiciary Committee. Members also may introduce bills of impeachment, which are referred to the Judiciary Committee. So the committees are really important. If you're going to be a professional congressman, you have to get on a committee because that's where most of the work of the Congress is done, on the committees. And that's where the lobbying happens. That's where the expertise is important, on these different committees. And so if you are from a rural agricultural area of the United States, you probably want to be on the House Agricultural Committee, because that's where the real work of making policies and deciding how to spend money will be done. and you want to keep your job as a congressman representing farmers, then you better be on the agricultural committee or in somehow influencing agricultural policies, because that's what your people, or at least the ones who pay attention to politics, care about. The committee vote, then the committee votes, the Judiciary Committee votes on the resolution or bill of impeachment, and it needs to pass only by a majority vote. Then it goes to the House. If the articles of impeachment are recommended by the House Judiciary Committee, the full House votes to approve or disapprove a Judiciary Committee to conduct full-blown impeachment hearings. Again, only by a majority vote. So it's comparatively easier to vote to impeach a president. Convicting him through a Senate trial and impeachment, that is hard. So, I mean, if I was Joe Biden, because Republican congressmen want to get reelected and Republican Party is heavily influenced by Donald Trump, and Donald Trump represents militant conservative populism and white anxiety and grievance, I would have to be concerned that if the Republicans take office, if they take control of the Congress next year, at the end of this year, and going into next year when they go into office in January of 2023, that they might pass a bill of impeachment because it will help Donald Trump get reelected in 2024. I mean, again, every word that comes out of Joe Biden's mouth is focused on what's going to happen in November of this year in the US general election and what will happen in 2024 when Joe Biden runs for re-election. And so his statements on Ukraine, his statements on anything are, you can bet, are phrased in terms of his desperate efforts to strengthen the Democratic Party in November, in what, 8 months from now? 7 months from now? And then in 2024, when Joe Biden runs for re-election as president. And that, everything, Ukraine, climate change, China, then there's hearings in which the witnesses may be called, and the committee reports, the House Judicial Committee reports and forwards the report to the House to decide whether or not the Judiciary Committee's report on the supposed high crimes and misdemeanors of the president are considered, and then the House votes by simple majority on any article of impeachment, and then it goes to the Senate for trial. And as I said, it requires 2/3 majority vote. It's all performative. It's performative, but politics is performative. If I'm an American nationalist, I like performance. I want my representatives to reflect my deep aspirations, concerns, views. And so, yeah, performance, we like performance. And, okay, so I wanted to do a couple exercises here. So the House initiates all revenue bills, considers impeachment procedures and pauses articles of impeachment 2-year terms. I already said that. The Senate offers advice and consent on many major presidential appointments, including cabinet secretaries, ambassadors, and federal judges. It tries impeached officials, including not just presidents, but also federal judges that are seen as maybe corrupt. They are 6-year terms, and there's 100 members. The House is more centralized, more formal, and stronger leadership. Rules Committee, fairly powerful in controlling time and rules of debate in conjunction with the Speaker of the House. That's today Nancy Pelosi, the most powerful female politician in the United States. She's the Speaker. There's a Senate is less centralized, less formal, weaker leadership, no Rules Committee. Limits on debate come through unanimous consent or cloture of filibuster. So my professors told me that the really creative legislation in the United States, the laws, the really creative legislation making happens in the House, not so much in the Senate. They're more focused on giving big speeches. it's more prestigious, but this is where the creativity in legislation typically happens in the House. Yeah, so comity, the willingness of the different Democrats and Republicans to cooperate with each other has been breaking down. It's really broken down with Trump. And so the House and the Senate are much more partisan and polarized among party identity than was the case when I was your age back in the United States in the early 1980s. So let's go to an exercise here. And I got to remember, I got to shut down this computer at 11:30 in order to get the recording. So let's do this pretty quickly here. So Congress exercise, yes, open. Hopefully just a second here and make this, how do I do this now? Go like this, and then we go to view. We go to, okay, so let me send you this file and go here, and go here, we go to chatting. Chatting. Oh, here's chatting. See, chatting. And we go here. We go to PC, and then we go to my USB. We go to US government, and I send you this file. And here we go. Ukraine. Nope, that's not the one. Congress in the Flash. I'm going to make sure I send you the right one because, okay, here it goes. Open. Okay, so you're getting the file that I'm sending out here. And so please open that file. And this is, again, the file. And so you can see here, Congress in a flash. There you see Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, Democrat. So since the majority of the members of the House are Democrats, she has been elected Speaker. She represents San Francisco, the most liberal leftist area, among the most liberal leftist areas of the United States. So she tends to be more left of center than other Congress people because, again, you have to get reelected. So it says here, the United States Congress is the legislative lawmaking branch of our federal government. Congress meets in Washington to make federal laws that apply to the entire country. Congress is bicameral, which means it is made up of two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Each chamber includes elected officials from all 50 states. Congress was created by the Constitution. The document describes how this branch of government works. And, you know, legislature, I guess, comes from Latin term, a verb that means to legislate, a verb that means to make laws. Legislature, a legislator, a person who makes laws. Legislative, and an adjective that means lawmaking. The legislative branch in the lawmaking branch is the lawmaking branch. The legislation is a written document that is or may become a law. And so we already mentioned here, Congress is divided into districts, serves the people of the whole. Remember, the people that wrote the U.S. Constitution were very suspicious of powerful monarchs, executive branch. So Article 1 deals with the Congress of the Constitution. Here you see the Constitution. Article 1, the first article you read after the preamble that states the purposes of, you know, trying to create a government that's for the welfare of the people. Article 1 is the Congress. So they probably intended the Congress to be the most important branch of government. Article 2 deals with the presidency, the executive branch, and Article 3 deals with the judiciary. So, you know, in terms of what was intended when they wrote this Constitution, sort of like an elected king, right, who would preside. The president would preside. And he would be George Washington. They already knew George Washington, the leader of the American military during the war with the British, that this person was going to be the first president. And so when he was president, and for the next few presidents afterwards, they didn't really propose much legislation. That would start to happen under Andrew Jackson, Donald Trump's big hero. I think the seventh president of the United States. And he was a populist. He was also a slave owner. His administration began to be the one that would propose laws, that would begin that process of proposing laws. And I don't think I have any. There you see Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill. And he was a war hero in the War of 1812 against the British, beat the British at the Battle of New Orleans. So, and he was the last president born under the British monarchy. So, and so we already talked about who qualifies. Oh, by the way, there you can see George Washington on the $1 bill. And, all right, so I'm going to go on here. So the powers of the Congress, it creates the rules on how to become a citizen. It collects taxes, pays debts, and borrows money. It regulates commerce and trade. There are between 17 and 35 powers listed in the Constitution. Coin money and punish counterfeiters. Punish pirates. Arr, pirates. Arr. That was a problem at the end of the 18th century, right? Pirates aren't really a problem, although they did become a problem off of Somalia when Somalia broke down. Establish post offices, protect patents and copyrights, create lower federal courts, declare war, raise and support an army and navy, and make any other laws that are necessary and proper to carry out the powers in this list. So declaring war used to be a formal process. The US Congress hasn't formally declared war. A state of war exists between the United States and such since World War II, when they declared war, I think, on Bulgaria. But they have passed legislation to authorize the president to do everything that the president thinks is necessary to deal with Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait, or to deal with the September 11, 2001 hijacking attacks. Do whatever you think needs to be done, George W. Bush. So it's not officially a declaration of war, but it has been interpreted by the US Congress as basically fulfilling the Congress's requirement to authorize full-scale military operations. But the US president has frequently used deadly force and killed people using military force without waiting for Congress to get an approval, going back to the end of the 18th century. When Napoleon came to power, he didn't want America trading with Britain, and so he would order his navy to intercept American ships trying to bring trade to Great Britain. And so there was an unofficial naval war between the United States and France called the Quasi-War, and people were killing each other. But there was never any declaration of war in that case. Who's in charge? There you see the Speaker of the House. And to make laws, Congress makes law by introducing an idea, discussing and changing it, and voting on it, and sending it to the president for approval. The rough draft of a law is called a bill, etc. Bills can start in either chamber of Congress, but the example below starts in the House of Representatives. So the president has to sign any legislation that's passed by the Congress, and he can veto it. But then he can be overridden in a 2/3 majority, and both Houses of Congress have to vote by over 2/3 to override the veto. And that was more common in the past. It doesn't typically happen more recently. So goes to the committee. That's where the committee does most of the work. Then there's a floor debate, and people make speeches, and they're trying to posture and appeal to public support. Then there's a vote. Then it goes to the Senate, and then the House and the Senate might come up with different versions of the law, and then they have to come up with a conference committee to reconcile the differences. A lot of important work happens in these conference committees. Then there's another vote in both houses, and the president goes to the president's office, and he has to sign it. If he doesn't sign it, it can be vetoed by just not signing it or just vetoing it. And so let's now go to the next file, and we go here to sorry, scroll down to the bottom here. This exercise, and so please open up this file, which you are now receiving, and now let's that. Open up that And then you know what I'm going to have to do? We have to shift to the other computer. And close that and go to view. And go here, view. Okay, so you received this file. So let me divide you into two groups. And group one, do this exercise, and group two, do these two exercises. Okay? So so group one will do this exercise, and group two will do this exercise. Let me divide you into two groups. And no, that's not what I want to do, breakout rooms.